All right. Well, it's a few minutes past 5:30, so I think let's go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I would like to ask everyone to mute their mics for the duration of the presentation. We will open the floor for questions afterwards. So the goal of our speaker series, Diversity in Water, is to highlight the stories of diverse leaders in the water industry, how their identity has impacted their journey, and how they see diversity playing a role in the future of the water industry. So tonight we're going to be hearing from Dr. Willie Harper. And this event is brought together by two different AWWA committees. So our diversity committee, Savina, do you want to tell us a little bit about the diversity committee?
Yes, the diversity committee is a group of people that we like to proactively promote and volunteer employment opportunities and encourage diversity and celebrate the mosaic of people who bring a variety of backgrounds, styles, perspectives, beliefs into the water industry. So we like to create platforms such as this and toolkits and things so you can bring diversity and inclusion into your utility to make it a part of the DNA of our association. So if you are interested in being a diversity and inclusion champion, or you have any questions or concerns, please contact me. And we will look forward to having you.
Awesome. So the other committee that's been involved is the Young Professionals Committee. So the Young Professionals Committee is kind of the welcoming mat for students and young professionals that are coming into the water industry. So AWWA defines a young professional as someone who's 35 years old or younger, or has been in the industry for less than 10 years. But we welcome all water professionals to our events. Typically, we do a few happy hours in each district, plant tours, outreach to universities, and volunteer at State Science Day. Currently, I don't believe we have any upcoming events, but if you're interested in coming to any of those, we've been doing some virtual happy hours. You're always welcome. And so this is the team that's been pulling together these events. So it's composed of me, Julie Lasakovitz, Savina Phillips, Sapna Mulkey, and Megan Shortridge. And so we just kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of who's behind the scenes, so to speak. But yeah, without further ado, I want to hand it over to Professor Willie Harper, who's a professor at AFIT, to talk about his career journey. So Professor Harper, if you want to start sharing your screen.
Hey, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks
Yep.
great.
Okay. Hi. Zoom, talking to people on Zoom. Isn't that a statement about the world we're in, and hopefully the world will be leaving behind, or at least the world that we're walking into. I'm Willie Harper, but if you met me before I went to UCLA, you didn't call me Willie. You called me Frank because I went by my middle name. That's what's the F stand for. And since UCLA, if you met me playing basketball or something like that, you might call me Will. But the people that I meet along the way professionally just use my first name, and the students I deal with call me Dr. Harper or Professor Harper, or that guy that gave that lecture about sewage or something along those lines. I'm happy to be here with you. I love the fact that I can be here to share with you. You see my title and you might be wondering, why are we talking about love? This is water and sewage, right? Well, I'll get to that. And yeah, I'm a professor at the Air Force Institute of Technology, and I'll get into that too. This is my outline, and at the bottom, let me start with the disclaimer, I'm certainly not going to be speaking for the Air Force or my university or the DOD or the government. This talk is very personal, and there's nobody in the government that has endorsed any of the stuff I'm about to say. I might incidentally mention some products. I'm going to try not to, but I might incidentally mention some products or trade names or services. The government doesn't endorse any of that. AFIT, the EPA, my main sponsor, DOD, they don't endorse any of that. And I don't have any conflicts here. I don't have a company that I'm trying to build up. I'm not using this as a tool to enrich myself personally. And you see my outline. I'm going to try to spend most of my time talking about my background. And in that section, I'm going to talk about my career journey. But my career journey is very tightly connected to my personal journey. So I have to talk some about who I am and where I came from, just to feel that I'm communicating with you. And then I'm also going to get into my research interests in that background section. I'm going to spend some time talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a very, very important subject to me and to this committee. And then I have some other things. Before I get into this, also, let me thank the subcommittees for diversity and young professionals for having me here. I love the fact that I can have this opportunity to reach out and share with you today. So let's go ahead and get into this. And love is my first thing to talk about. So where am I going here? Did you happen into a dating site, or am I gonna do some relationship counseling here today? Are any of you struggling in your love lives? And am I offering myself as that person that can help you find your way through those challenges? No, I'm not the person to come to if you need dating advice or any of that personal love stuff. Although I do occasionally have students that will tell me a little more than I want to know about what's going on with them. So that's a challenge. But there are two reasons why I'm talking about love today. The first is a very selfish reason. I need to remind myself to say this word, love, because I don't say it enough. There are times in my professional journey and my personal journey when I'm actually really, really, really enjoying what I'm doing, but I don't actually take the time to say that I love it. I love the fact that I can be here with you today. I love it. I need to verbalize that. And along the way in this presentation, I need to remind myself to use this word. So this primarily is a personal reminder. I just need to say this word sometimes. But there's a second reason why I mention love. I'm a little bit nosy. I'm a lot bit nosy. I'm actually really, really nosy about the people that come into my life. And now all of you are in my life for this next half hour or 45 minutes or so. And I actually want to learn something about you. So I want to ask you guys to use the chat and tell me a little bit of something of yourself. I don't have a great icebreaker here. I'm not a comedian. I can't sing. My dancing is questionable, but I do want to find out about something about what you guys love. I see somebody loving riding horses. So I see that. Let's see, who else is going to share something? My family, including my dogs. Thank you, Karen. Reading, spending way too much money on reading books. Thank you, Dana. Kevin, traveling. Kevin Osby, man. That's my, I go back more than 30 years with Kevin Osby. We travel. I see backpacking, friends, travel, classical music, Sadia, chocolate, volunteering. Thank you, Megan. Home brewing, hiking, dog training. Megan, you're a better person than me because dogs, well, I struggle with dogs, so, or maybe they struggle with me. I'll tell you some things about what I love as I go through this talk. Again, this talk is personal. I can't just come here and talk about water and sewage in a really kind of impersonal and detached way. I have to get personal. So I'm going to get personal. And now I'll go ahead and start getting personal. Let me start with this image here. Now, I'm gonna try to, how can I hide this toolbar? Let me see. Well, I hope you guys can see this slide pretty well. The toolbar is blocking it a bit. The little boy that you see on the right is me in the 70s. And the picture that you see, these are my pictures. I took a picture of one of my yearbooks. That's me going to well, you know how it is when you're in high school. You take a picture for the yearbook and you go to the photographer and they tell you to hold up your hand up to your cheek, like that's a natural position. So I looked and I felt so awkward taking that position, taking that picture for my yearbook. Well, my journey, I was born in Florida, born into a military family. My father served in Vietnam. My mom had worked in many different organizations in the federal government, as she still does now as a contractor. My father's a very, very good man, did many, many good things in his life, and he integrated Central High School back in the 50s. So for those of you history buffs that know something about Central High School and integration, Jefferson Thomas was involved with that, and that's the man that raised me. I grew up in the greater Los Angeles area in North Long Beach. I don't have a map here, but if you're curious, you can just Google Long Beach or North Long Beach. It's a part of Los Angeles County that's in the southeastern corner of Los Angeles County. It's not like in the heart of the city of LA, but it's certainly a very rural, a very urban area surrounded by some cities that are a little more well-known, like Compton, for example. I went to school in Paramount because North Long Beach was a part of the Paramount Unified School District. So I spent many of my formative years in Paramount, California, a very, very diverse community, Latinos, Asian Americans from many different countries, Samoans, some Black people, white people, other people from other places, but lots of Latinos and Asian Americans from Paramount. And I went to public school, so I'm a product of the public school system. I feel really, really good about my experiences growing up there. I had a great family. My mom and I were very close. I grew up with an older sister who used to beat me up a lot until I got a little bit too big for that. But she and I have great love for each other. And I have a very, very strong attachment to the city of Paramount because of all these experiences I had there, and because there were many groups, civic groups in Paramount that provided financial support to me to go to school. I didn't come from a family with lots of money. So getting scholarship money from groups like the Seroptimus Club and the Paramount Mexican American Club, getting support from the American Legion, those things were huge for me. So I'll always love Paramount because of that, of all these different kinds of connections. And really, Paramount will always be home, even though I haven't been there in a long time, haven't lived there in a long time. I also took a chemistry class at Compton College. I wasn't real comfortable with my chemistry background after I left Paramount. So I took a class at Compton College that gave me more confidence. So I have a connection to Compton too. So like everybody on this call, I had different experiences growing up. It wasn't all love. I do love many things about Paramount, but it wasn't all love. There were challenges growing up, and I got teased about things. I got teased about being a good student sometimes. I was a little bit chunky. Even in this picture, you might. I mean, I was a kid, but I was a little chunky at times. So people would, pinch me in the stomach or call me fat boy or something like that. But the main thing I got teased about was how dark I am. So I don't know if you can appreciate how dark I am, but I'm a dark guy. It might be a little hard. You can see me through the camera, and I know there's a glare coming into my office. But in the minds of the people I grew up with, I wasn't this dark. I was this dark. I was black, blackity black, the worst, deepest, darkest black you could imagine. And every time I walked into a room, people would go at it, me thinking, saying all kinds of Black jokes. So being dark in the 80s was rough. In the 70s and 80s was rough. So I got teased a lot about that. So I want to get in your business a bit. What did you guys get teased about? Share in the chat. I know if somebody got teased about something that you can share. Being a nerd, Julie, thank you. Kevin, Chunky. Tia, poor. I know what you mean, man. People would laugh at me for wearing school clothes that they saw me wear the year before. Book nerd, Sadia, my name. Yeah, Sadia, they probably called you Saudia. B. Davis, being dark, but you're not darker than me. Brian Davis, you think you're darker than me. But anyway, that's an old issue. Dana called a Kmart preppy in the 80s, no designer clothes. I get that too. I don't think my mom took me and my sister to any fancy places to shop. We'd go to the Paramount swap meet or the Compton swap meet and sometimes the mall to get things. So we get teased too. Let's see. Yeah, I see it, definitely colorism. So colorism was a nuisance. I mean, in my mind, I think it was a bigger nuisance than it actually was. But the truth is, colorism in the 80s, I think did for a while weigh on me in terms of my self-esteem. I think it was something that I wanted to retreat from. I didn't want to get teased. There were times when I wished I was a lighter skin. I didn't necessarily want to be really light, like super light, but I wanted to be just a few shades lighter so that these kids that I grew up with would stop teasing me so much, because they seemed to think I was darker than the darkest dark. And I wanted to get away from that. And in some ways, this is the beginning of my connection to school, because I realized, even while I was getting teased about how dark I was, I realized that I was having success in school, and the good grades and the feedback that I got in school made me want to retreat into that more, because I was affirmed in that. But if I'm honest with you, my self-esteem suffered for a while. It really wasn't until really wasn't until the later part of the 80s that I started to feel good about being as dark as I am. So colorism was a nuisance coming up. Limited money was a nuisance. I grew up in communities where a lot of people had limited money, so I didn't feel like we stood out. But you know, when you want new clothes and you get some new clothes, but maybe you don't get lots of new clothes, you know, you get you get a couple of new things. You know, you're telling your parents, hey, I want a lot of new things, and they're saying, hey, you know, you get a few new things, not a lot of new things. That can be a nuisance. But the big thing that I had to deal with as a kid, and this isn't so much a nuisance as it was a real threat. I grew up in a part of the greater Los Angeles area that had real problems with crime and gangs in particular. So I was intensely aware of gun violence and gangs, and my response to it was a bit different from some of my peers. I had peers that responded to the gang threat by trying to be more educated about it, by trying to know which gang was which gang, and you know, this street Crip or this street Blood, which gang used what sign. They tried to do the little gang dances to try to relate. My response was different. I tried intentionally not to educate myself about gangs, because I had a kind of contempt, but I also had a fear that if I did anything to really engage the whole gang culture, that I could be at risk. And there were a lot of times when I felt afraid. Times when I would walk home from school. There were times when I would have to walk home at night in gang infested areas that were frankly scary. So this was, I call it a nuisance in this slide, and it was because I worried about it. But in retrospect, it was much bigger than a nuisance. It was a real threat. And I bring it up now because this threat of crime and gun violence, gangs, drugs, prostitution these things gave me a very strong sense that I lived in a community that needed to be improved, a community that wasn't as good as other communities. And I felt like a good person, the kind of person that could do some good in a community. And I had that passion for wanting to do good when I left Paramount and arrived in college at UCLA. I had this sense that I survived this tough upbringing, and maybe I can be part of the solution to making a community better. So speaking of moving on, I did go to college. I went to UCLA. I majored in civil engineering. I thought that civil engineering was a good way to apply my interest in math and science. I wasn't really sure initially what particular focus area in civil engineering, but I did that, and I feel real good about that experience at UCLA. Great program. I made great friends. You guys, many of you have been through, or probably all of you have been to college, many of you at least, and great experiences there. But the thing is, after UCLA, I didn't feel prepared to enter into professional practice as an engineer. I had this idea that I wanted to go into academia, but I also wanted to be able to do something useful. And I didn't feel that I could do that. So I entered into a Master's of Engineering program at Cornell University. It's a one-year program, lots of classes, but there was a strong focus on engineering design, particularly a sort of capstone design project. And I wanted that experience. I thought that it would boost my confidence, my ability to do something in practice that was useful. I just wasn't quite ready to enter into the working world. And I feel really good about that experience at Cornell. And ironically, my experience at Cornell inspired and actually stimulated some interest in research. The reason is because there were really good professors at Cornell that had a lot of passion for their research, and that passion for research came out in their research, in their teaching. So people like Jim Gossett, Richard Dick, Lynn Lyon, these people were brilliant teachers. They were better teachers than any teacher I had at UCLA. And they were also really good at their research. I saw that connection between having that passion for research and teaching. And I think because I had that quality, that really high quality interaction with those faculty members, that affirmed that really planted a stronger seed in me to eventually go back and get a PhD and become a faculty member. After working for a few years, I went back to Berkeley and did some research on biological phosphorus removal with David Jenkins. Obviously, you have to do that to be in academia. The experience at Berkeley was great. I loved living in the Bay Area. There's the love word again. I have to remind myself to use that love word. I loved living in the Bay Area. I didn't love the PhD process. It's an uphill climb. It's a long uphill climb. And at times it can be very stressful. So I didn't love all of that. But I loved the fact that I was pursuing some interesting and challenging research questions. And I loved my life, and I loved my advisor and how he interacted with me. So all of that works really well for me. I also had some work experience along the way. So when I was in high school and college, I had some part-time jobs. I didn't love my part-time jobs, but I thought they were good for me. When I was in high school, I worked for Carl's Jr. So those of you that have been on the West Coast know something about Carl's Jr. It's like the West Coast version of Hardee's. So I mopped floors and washed dishes and flipped burgers. And I wore these really uncomfortable, tight brown uniforms. I think I didn't like working at Carl's Jr. because I didn't like the uniform they made us wear. Very uncomfortable. But then after that, I found a job working at the International House of Fabrics in the Lakewood Mall. And I became, knowledgeable about fabric. So I could actually tell the difference between the kind of fabric you should use to make, say, curtains, and the kind of fabric you should use to, say, make a dress or some other indoor application. So I felt kind of good about that. And I didn't have to wear those ugly, tight that uniform from Carl's Jr. If you're not familiar with Carl's Jr. uniforms, just go to Google, type in Carl's Jr. brown uniform, and you'll see the most ridiculous. Maybe things have changed in the 30 or 40 years that passed, but that was horrible. And then in college, I was a tutor. I was a receptionist at a peer counseling center. So I was the person making appointments for undergraduate students that needed to talk to a peer counselor, another undergraduate, an older undergraduate student. I had summer internships that were good, that got me familiar with the corporate culture. I didn't know much about corporate culture. I think in my mind, I just thought that people went to these buildings with nice suits on and typed at computers. I just didn't know much about corporate culture. So I learned a lot about that, including how to dress. I didn't understand that very well. And then I worked full-time for CH2M Hill. I lived in Atlanta when I worked for CH2M Hill, and this was after I had finished the program at Cornell. My first year at CH2M Hill was a challenge. It was a challenge because my first year was full of field work and wastewater sampling. I felt like I was sampling every kind of wastewater you can imagine. Obviously, your garden variety domestic wastewater produced from the pulp and paper mills and in other industrial applications. I just felt like I was drowning in wastewater sampling, and I didn't feel challenged intellectually, but beyond that, I didn't see that these experiences were actually helping me figure out my I don't know, the focus area that I would ultimately have for research. I really didn't at that time see how that was benefiting me. However, I love the fact, and that's the love word again, I love the fact that eventually I was able to see how those wastewater experiences benefited me as an engineer, as an analyst, and as a researcher, because I did learn a lot about wastewater treatment systems while I was going around taking wastewater samples from different locations. So it was educational, even though there were aspects of it that I did not love. And I did get challenged at CH2M Hill eventually, intellectually. There were components of wastewater treatment systems that I was able to analyze or design. I did pilot studies too that were interesting. So that was very useful for me. And since 2002, I've been a faculty member. There are aspects of being a faculty member that I love. I love having good colleagues, and I have good colleagues at AFIT, and I've had good colleagues in other places too. I love the interactions that I have with students when I'm talking about a subject that interests me and them. And I love it when students bring their own experiences and their own perspective to an interesting topic. Those kinds of invigorating experiences, I love them. Unfortunately, though, not every lecture is like that. Sometimes I'm talking about something that I'm not as interested in, or they're not as interested in, and sometimes we're all just trying to make it to the end of class. And I've been there. How many of you? I'm sure you guys have been there. I mean, give me a thumbs up if you've been in class and the last thing you want to do is be in that class. You just want to make it to the end of the session. And if the professor can stop talking for 5 minutes, things will be better. You've been there. I see William, you've been there. Julie, you've been there. I see some other people that have been there. I don't love that. And I don't like being in that position as a faculty member. So there are other things about being a faculty member that I love. I love pursuing an interesting research question. Even with the challenges that come along with that, I love that. But I have to say, the thing I love the most about being a faculty member is the interactions that I have with people, with colleagues, with collegial colleagues, and frankly, with students and research assistants. I started at Auburn. In 2007, I decided that that it was time to move closer to my parents. At that time, my parents had moved to Ohio. They left California and moved to Columbus, Ohio. So I moved to Pittsburgh to be closer to my to my parents. And then in 2012, I moved to Abbott, where I am now. So I'm going to answer some questions that I've received along the way and during this talk. Here's a question I received. Talk about the transition from working as a process engineer to academia. Was this your intended path? Why did you make this career move? How has your industry experience influenced your research? It was my intended path. I had the idea to become a professor. It occurred to me that I could become a professor when I was at UCLA, but I didn't know what I wanted to research. And I also wasn't really sure that I could actually do anything. I felt that I should get some practice, some experience in professional practice. And I felt that I also needed to get a PE license. You have to have a certain amount of experience in order to sit for the PE exam. So the plan was get a master's degree, get some experience, figure something out, some things out, figure out what you want to study in research, and then go to academia. So this was the intended path. The transition worked pretty well. Obviously, consulting engineering and academia are different in meaningful ways, but I had some good mentoring, so the transition wasn't difficult. And it's the working experience that I've had has benefited my teaching and my research. It influences my research in a sense because I'm able to, I think, ask questions that are, in my opinion, more precise because I do have those field experience. And frankly, I think the experience that I had at all that wastewater experience that I had helps me plan my research execution a bit better. So one thing I want to say about my experience that I really love, there's the love word again, is the international experience that I've had. And I recommend to all of you, if you haven't been international yet, do it. Go to another country. In 2007, I received a grant from the National Science Foundation to work at the Denmark Technical University. And this is a picture of me in the lab. As a faculty member, we don't get to spend as much time in the lab as maybe we would like to. That time, that summer in Denmark gave me a lot of time in the lab doing experiments, learning a lot of techniques, dusting off old skills. I mean, everything from just simple pipetting to setting up experiments the right way. I really, really appreciated that. And I had a great mentor there, a brilliant researcher by the name of Bart Smets. And then more recently, sponsored by the Fulbright Scholars Award, I was in Tokyo working with Akihito Terada, who's also a brilliant researcher. I actually met Aki in Denmark. He was doing a postdoc there, and I always wanted to continue to work with Aki. He and I worked very closely on some nitrogen issues. We also visited some wastewater treatment plants to essentially advise them on nitrogen issues. So it was a great, great time, and I love many things about Japanese culture, particularly the food. And more recently, I spent some time in Togo, and I'm going to talk more about this a little later. This was sponsored by the Embassy Science Program, Embassy Science Fellowship, which is a program that's run out of the Department of State. And I had a chance to work in the US Embassy in Lomé, which is the capital city of Togo. For those of you that don't know, I'll talk a little more about Togo. Togo is a small, really thin West African country that sits between Ghana and Benin. I work at the Air Force Institute of Technology. This is a picture of us. I'm seated here in the front, and our current dean, who I think is on the call, is in the middle here, Dr. Badiru. We are a mixture of military and civilian faculty. The civilians are, well, dressed like me in civilian garb, and the military faculty are dressed in these airman battle uniforms, and they bring a lot of experience, operational experience to the classroom. And I like working with the military faculty because they're very collegial. Sometimes faculty don't always work so well together. I'm not sure if any of you have seen that during your time in academia. Sometimes faculty can be a bit competitive, people fight over space and other things. At AFIT, we have a very collegial environment. People at AFIT realize that my success is success for all of us. It's not as though if something good happens for me, that it's somehow a threat to someone else's. So I like the environment, but it is this interesting mixture of military culture and academia, which is a marriage that you wouldn't think would work. But I'm sure many of you in your lives, you've seen marriages that you wouldn't necessarily think work, but they do work. I'm sure you can think of a friend that's married to somebody and you might think, oh my God, that's never going to work, but it does. Well, that's kind of AFIT. You might think that this top-down hierarchy associated with the military could never peacefully coexist with the creativity and the independence that is promoted through academia, but I think it works real well. So why am I a professor? Well, so I told you that this talk was going to be very personal, so I'm going to get personal again. Let me tell you, when I was in high school, I wasn't thinking about being a professor. That idea occurred to me in college, and even then I wasn't actually sure of what professors did. But in high school, I wasn't thinking about being a professor. I thought of a lot of things. I only knew that I was pretty good at math and science. And I knew that I lived in a community that needed to be better, a dangerous community, a community that was full of things like factories and near freeways. We certainly had environmental justice issues in Paramount and North Long Beach. So I knew I lived in a community that wasn't a great community, and I knew I was good in math and science, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I thought about things. I used to see the meteorologists on TV. I thought maybe that's what I could do. It looks like fun. I can talk about high and low pressure regions, but I didn't see how I could be making the community better. Obviously, in retrospect, when you're helping people figure out the weather before they leave for work, that's a good thing. I want to know what the weather's like. But I didn't think that, listen, I was this guy, this high school guy that wanted to be as important as somebody like, I don't know, some kind of community activist, somebody stirring things up and challenging the status quo, someone leading a march on Washington. But I didn't think community activists were so technical. How am I going to use my math and science with that? I didn't know exactly how much people like Martin Luther King were being paid. So I didn't necessarily think that was for me. I thought about being a preacher for just a few minutes. And I think I was thinking about that because, listen, in the 80s and the early and mid 80s, there were televangelists like Fred Price and other people out there, Kenneth Copeland. They're on TV. These guys look great. They have suits. They're talking. They're inspiring people, thundering about heaven and hell, and looking good doing it, and looking like they're making some money. But no, I decided not to do that. And I even thought briefly about being a diplomat. That seemed like a way to make the world a better place. But I didn't see that for me either. I actually talked to a guidance counselor at Paramount High School, and I was telling Mr. White about some of these ideas, and he told me, Frank, you need to be more realistic. And then I said, well, maybe I should dream about being president. And he said, no, Frank, more realistic. So Mr. White didn't think that I was being realistic with some of these ideas. I don't know what Mr. White thought I should do. But when I got to college, gradually being a professor seemed like a good idea. It's an idea that grew on me gradually. It's not like I hit the UCLA campus and thought, I'll be a professor. No, it's an idea that grew. It seemed like a good idea. For one thing, professors work on campus, on a college campus, and UCLA is a beautiful campus. I'm sure many of you have been to beautiful campuses before. I've been to OSU, it's a beautiful campus. I've been in Notre Dame. We have a lot of beautiful campuses, but I have to be honest with you. there are no campuses that are a lot more beautiful than UCLA. It's a gorgeous campus. And I thought, how great would it be to work at a beautiful place? It seemed like a laid back enough life. I didn't really know what professors were so stressed about. They seemed to go to the classes and lecture. I could do that. I wanted to use my math and science, so maybe I can be some kind of engineering professor. Okay. And I like talking. So if I'm a professor, people have to listen, right? And I had encouragement. I had a few professors encourage me to consider academia. I remember also talking to a friend, a close friend of mine, a guy named Jerome. He and I were talking about, I don't know, life. We were in the front yard of his mother's house. And he said, I think I'm just going to get my PhD and be a professor. And I thought, I think I'll just do the same thing. It's those little seeds that get planted. And I think over time, I just decided that it could be a way to reach my potential. Now, looking back on all this, I love the journey that I've taken to this position. But the truth is, I could have been a meteorologist, Maybe if Mr. Whitehead encouraged me in high school, I'd be a meteorologist. And I could have reached my potential. I could have used my math and science. I could have talked my heart out if I had been a preacher or something, but I chose to be a professor. And these were some of the things I was thinking. Let me tell you some things about my research area. And I have some other questions that I'm going to answer along the way. Primarily, I'm interested in biological processes. What does that mean? I'm interested in those things that are happening because they're being mediated by microorganisms. That's whole cells, to include things like spores. I'm interested in viruses. I'm not one of those people that's interested in viruses just because of COVID. I've been interested in viruses for a long time. And I do experiments in the lab. I cultivate mixed communities of microorganisms, and I study what they do. We've done a lot of work with radio-labeled substrates where we add a radio-labeled chemical, radio-labeled pollutant into a mixed culture like this. And we take samples. There's that wastewater sampling that I didn't like when I was at CH2M Hill, coming back. Take samples, and we evaluate those samples to see what's happening. We also do a lot of different kinds of microscopy, Air Force, atomic force microscopy, and we also do dual fluorescent microscopy. As you guys may know, with fluorescence microscopy, you could use probes that will bind to certain components of cells, and that will allow you to image them to see how these communities, these little colonies are organized, and that can be useful depending on what you're studying. We also study proteins. I like the idea of trying to understand what particular proteins are doing. It can be tricky when you're studying mixed cultures, tricky to interpret what you're seeing. So sometimes we have to not study a culture or not study like a pure strain, but sometimes we have to study particular enzymes to see what they're doing. I'm supported primarily, the wastewater work that I do is sponsored by the Environmental Protection Agency. The groundwater and general environmental remediation work that I do is sponsored by the Air Force Civil Engineering Center. And I'm working with really talented people. Matthew Magnuson's very talented. And Yinji Tang is a great friend of mine and a great collaborator. And he works at Washington University in St. Louis. Okay, here's a couple of questions. The first one is, do you have any insight on PFAS removal from drinking water if detected in the future? I know a lot of you have heard about PFAS, these perfluoroalkyl substances, dangerous substances. People are calling them forever chemicals. If you're not familiar with PFAS, you can do a quick Google search. Yes, I've done some research in this area, and I have a colleague, Eric Bonaparte, that's done a lot more research in this area, and there's a lot going on in the literature that I'm following closely because I have to follow this to keep my class materials current and to keep the connections to my own research. In the Truth is, there are unit operations that we can use to remove PFAS chemicals. There's promising indications that combinations of unit operations like activated carbon in combination with membrane processes and/or some advanced oxidation systems, not all, but some, can do something to attenuate these pollutants. It's tricky, it's probably expensive, and it's going to be a real challenge for utilities. And in fact, let's be clear, the PFAS issue is not an issue for the future. It's an issue for right now. And frankly, if water treatment plants aren't already thinking about what they need to do, they're late to the party. Earlier this year, the EPA reissued final regulatory determinations for contaminants in the 4th contaminant candidate list. And PFOS and PFOA, 2 of the PFAS chemicals, are going to be regulated. They're figuring out the regulations right now, and they're coming. In some places, they may have already hit the permit. So water utilities needed to be on this years ago. This issue has been brewing for a while. It's time now to put into practice what the research has shown us. Here's another question that I've received. How does trash impact our quality of water? It's not good. We need good source protection programs. In this country, generally speaking, we do have good source protection programs. There are certain parts of the country that struggle. I think we have some people from the EPA on the call that may be able to speak to source protection programs. I know in some developing countries, source protection is a trickier issue, and you can find a lot of examples of source waters polluted with your garden variety solid waste, and those things can cause lots of different kinds of pollutants to occur in our sources. Here's another question. I'm interested in hearing if he knows of any opportunity to detect pollutants further upstream in the collection system. We currently monitor for quantity of flow, that's wastewater, but I don't know of a method for evaluating water quality closer to the source other than collecting grab samples and using an auto sampler. Here we are, wastewater collection again. So that first year at CH2M Hill, all that time with me, with carrying buckets, that time I didn't love, carrying buckets of wastewater from one place to another, that stuff that I just detested. Now I love it because I know what this question is about. So yes, there are devices that we can use to monitor water quality in line. There are a variety of devices that can be used. They differ in terms of their effectiveness, in terms of their cost. There's one particular device that I have studied recently. This device is called a microbial fuel cell. In the lower left-hand corner of this slide, I'm showing you a picture of a small device, a microbial fuel cell that we built for this project. And what we did is we monitored water quality at an estuary near Cleveland. It's called Old Woman Creek. Maybe some of you know of it. And this was sponsored by a couple of organizations. And what we did is we developed this microbial fuel cell for the purpose of monitoring water quality. So for those of you that are not familiar with microbial fuel cells, you can do some simple searches to figure out the details of how they work. In a nutshell, the water that you're monitoring is introduced into this anode, and as a result of how polluted the water is, you get an electrical signal here. The amount of electricity that you get, and really the other properties of this signal, the peak height, the area under the signal, those things depend on what's in the water, depend on the water quality. So what we can do is we can very quickly get an electrical signal when water goes into this fuel cell, and then we can use a model that can quickly tell us how dirty the water is. And that's what my former student Elaine Feng figured out. She developed this artificial neural network to tell us what I'm gonna move this here. Okay, she developed this artificial neural network that would take the properties of the electrical signal and then use it to calculate some measure of water quality. This is what an artificial neural network can do for you. This artificial neural network it's a simulation of our human brain, and each of these neurons contains a mathematical function and some weighting things. You can get some details online, but basically we use the MATLAB platform to train an artificial neural network. Sorry, we'll get here. And well, this thing is, well, okay. What we did is we did a bunch of experiments. We collected a lot of data related to the electrical signal and the water quality. The water quality we measured as COD. And then we built a model that could relate the electrical signal to the COD. And then we tested the model on some other samples. And we compared the measured COD, the number that we measured, with the COD that was predicted from this model. And we were able to get really good agreement. So in principle, you can use a microbial fuel cell to monitor water quality in the collection system. Now, these microbial fuel cells are like pets. You have to take care of them. I think in some applications, they may be more trouble than they're worth, because you really do have to put a lot into them to make sure they're working properly. But if there is a framework and an infrastructure that's available to take care of and maintain these microbial fuel cells, they can be a good way to monitor water quality quickly. Another area I study is advanced oxidation. This is a collection of technologies that we use to remove pollutants from water. We've tested lots of dyes and lots of chemicals at the lab scale in these small reactors, and we've removed lots of pollutants from water in the lab. And I work with Mike Miller and Avinash Agarwal on that stuff. And another theme of mine is I'm interested in developing country issues, water and sanitation issues in developing countries. This has become a passion for me. This is an issue that connects to my high school self, the part of me that remembers Paramount, that remembers North Long Beach, that remembers living close to factories, that remembers seeing sewage flowing on the street when there was some kind of rain event. The part of me that remembers that community. Well, the truth is there are a lot of communities around the world that have very serious water and sanitation issues. And recently I had a chance to spend time in Togo. I mentioned that West Africa, that small West African country, working with this activist, community activist named Arsene. He's the guy pictured here. I also had a chance to speak to classes, and I had a chance to deal with this issue. In the lower left-hand corner of this slide, you see sewage, raw sewage being dumped at one of the major beaches in the country. This is just sewage sitting there. And I had a chance to recommend a design for a wetland to provide some treatment to this sewage. We did complete that design, and there was some funding that was made available to do some detailed design, but this has not been constructed yet. I'm interested in teaching too. I teach lots of different classes in water and sewage treatment. Environmental microbiology is cool, but what I love most is environmental law, because there's a part of me that wants to be a lawyer, and I think I have a couple of lawyers on the call. The truth is, environmental law is really, really interesting to the students. It's really interesting to me. There are a lot of issues that come up in the class that get everybody going. I think I see somebody on the chat that's sharing something. So I think the environmental law class, even though I'm not a lawyer, is probably my favorite class, because there's so many moments in that class that I love. I also teach some special topics classes and seminars. So I'll keep things moving here. Am I living my dream? The answer is sometimes. When I take the time to remember that I love what I'm doing, then I'm living the dream. I'm now living the dream, because I love the fact that I can speak to all of you. I love the fact that I can speak to people that I haven't met before, and also some of my colleagues and a few of my old friends have tuned in. I have some family members online. I love the fact that I can reach out like this. So this is great. This is living my dream. But the truth is I'm not always living my dream. Maybe it's because I'm not always thinking about it, but in other ways, sometimes I have to do things that I just don't love doing. And well, I think it's up to me to put some perspective around that. Now, I want to know if you are living your dream. I'm nosy and curious. Anybody living the dream? Yes, no, sometimes, frequently, infrequently, hardly ever. I'm just living. I see sometimes here. Anybody? Yes, life is better when you're greater than 50. Adrian, that's great. Yes, Julie accepted dream position in Switzerland. I'm happy for you, Julie. Happy for you. I see a probably here. Probably. Okay, I'll take that. Eugene is saying, working on it. Living the dream. It's all about perspective. Megan, you're right. All that's missing is travel, and I miss travel. Sierra's saying most of the time. So that sounds like most of the time she's thinking about it. So that's good. William, sometimes. I think the key is to think about it. I think that's what I need to do. Just periodically take my own temperature. Sabina, sometimes. Thank you for sharing that. So let's move to some other topics here. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Wow, this is important to me. I think when I was growing up in greater Los Angeles, I think I felt, and I don't think I can completely verbalize why I felt this way, but I think I felt like something of an underdog coming from a public school. We competed against schools from Orange County, and those schools seemed to be better schools. I think I felt something of an underdog. I didn't go to a fancy private school or boarding school. I didn't necessarily think my school was the best of schools. So I did feel that I was going to have to work a little harder, and I felt some kind of chip on my shoulder. I didn't want people to just judge me because of what I looked like or where I was from. And I think that was the beginning of my interest in these issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have to remember what these terms are, to be honest with you, because these terms get used so much. Frankly, I think I forget what they mean. Diversity, presence of different characteristics, and these characteristics don't just stop at race and gender. There are other things here: sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, language, life experience, political perspective. Okay. I needed that reminder. Different characteristics. It's not just one or two things. It's different things, and that's useful for me. It's also useful for me to remember what equity is. I think that this equity is one of those things I forget what it is. Promoting justice, impartiality, fairness. Okay, it's what we do. It's processes and procedures. Equity sounds like something that we can be about every day, even if we're in places that are not very diverse. At least we can be about equity, even if in so many other ways we have challenges. Equity is something we can be about like today. And then inclusion, that seems like some kind of outcome. Okay, I think we can be about inclusion. You'll hear all kinds of organizations tell you about their challenges related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, yet it seems to me that equity and inclusion is something that's totally in your control. If you're the ones that can create the processes and procedures, and if you're the ones that can take responsibility for how people are embraced when they come into your organizations, then what's the problem, is my question. I'm tired of the excuses that organizations have when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can't find qualified candidates. We can't find this, we can't find that. At least you can take responsibility for the equity and inclusion part. If your organizations aren't diverse, take some responsibility for that part. And when I look at the literature, I see some promising things. I see a lot of papers about diversity and equity and inclusion. So people are studying this. leaders and really at every level have no excuse for not knowing more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because there's a lot of stuff out there on this subject. But I will say this, I see some papers here that are making conclusions based on really small data sets, and in some cases, conclusions that don't line up with the results. So I think we need to demand some better scholarship from the people that do this kind of work. But I tell you, I think we got a lot to work with here. So here's a question. Do I feel that the industry is diverse? My industry, well, I don't know how diverse my industry is. With respect to race, probably not very. With respect to gender, not as much as it should be. But with respect to sexual orientation, with respect to socioeconomic status, life experience, I don't have a good handle on that. And the answer to how we ensure that it is, I think, is strategic planning. I think organizations have to take a step back. They need to think about who they are, what they do, what makes them special, and they need to connect diversity, equity, and into inclusion directly into those plugs. I don't think diversity, this state of having a diverse population, I don't think that happens spontaneously. I don't think it's a thermodynamically favorable process. I think you have to make that happen. And I think you make that happen with strategic planning. I think these subjects are difficult in most circles. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion come up and people roll their eyes like, here we go again. The liberals are going to have their moment again. Oh gosh, now we have to, I think people make all kinds of negative connections. Handouts, oh gosh, diversity. Now we have to talk about giving people jobs they don't deserve. Oh gosh, now we have to talk about political correctness. Now we have to talk nice to people, or non-traditional values. We have lots of concerns related to, remember, diversity is many different things. Sexual orientation is one of them, LGBTQ community members. Well, when you start talking about these things, I think some people recoil and they start thinking about non-traditional values. I think we have to disconnect from these negative connotations. I think we have, as advocates, need to do a better job of making the right connections. We need not to make these negative connections, but we need to show people how diversity, equity, and inclusion helps our mission, our bottom line, how it helps companies make more money if that's what they're primarily interested in, or how it allows the Air Force to be more prepared to deliver lethal force to the enemy. I think we have to do a better job of protecting the DEI brand. I think that's our responsibility. And remember, equity and inclusion, that's totally in our control. Don't accept excuses from leaders telling you that there's nothing we can do about diversity and equity. That's ridiculous. Equity and inclusion is totally in your control. Those are your processes that you're using. And when people walk in your door and they don't feel welcome, that's your fault, not theirs. So we have to do a better job with that. We have to demand more and better scholarship from the researchers. So here's a question. Can you identify the key actions that the private sector can do to increase diversity? Strategic planning. Strategic planning. Sit down, think. It's hard, but you have to do this work. I don't like the strategic planning. And if my dean is still on the call, and he might be, he probably knows what it's like to try to get people to strategically plan. It's not easy. Everybody's like, oh, here we go again. But you have to do it because it's the way you deliberately do things through a plan. And a few things, a lot of you are young people. So let me say, there's always time to do things the right way. Along the way in your career, you're going to have people encourage you to cut corners. There's going to be a proposal deadline right in front of you, and you'll want to collect preliminary data. You'll want to create a good team. You'll want to think through the budget, but somebody somewhere is going to tell you to just throw it together and put it in there so that you can have something. No, there's always time to do things the right way. I know you have to work hard sometimes. I know you have to work long hours sometimes. That goes with the territory, and I still do it. But that doesn't mean you cut corners. Do things the right way. There's always time to do things the right way. And by the way, that means saying no. Sometimes people ask you to get involved with things and the answer is no, I'm not getting involved. You're busy, you're already busy. So sometimes it's no. Go to conferences and meet people. Even if it's in this format, you gotta meet people. Work in another country and be in a place where success is the norm. I'm so happy for Julie. She told me about where she was going in Switzerland. That's a place where success is the norm. People, when people are around other successful people, all the things that go into success just rub off. So be in a place where everybody's successful and that success will just rub off on you. I hope you love what you do. I'm sorry that I didn't use the word love more in this talk. I tried to remind myself, but I do love some things about my journey. I love a lot of things about my journey, my friends, my life, my career. I hope you love what you do, some aspect of what you do. If you don't, I hope in the future that you will love it more and find love in really as much as you can. Keep the small things small. There's going to be a lot of times to fight, to go to war. Sometimes you get bad news and you just want to punch something. I know I felt that way, but sometimes the small things are just that. They're the small things. Earlier this week, I got some bad news in an email, and I think I wanted to go to war. Then the next day I found out that that bad news didn't apply to me. So keep the small things small. And your health comes first, not just about diet, not just about exercising, but keep your head together. Depression is a problem we're not talking about enough. We have a lot of other mental health challenges in our society, and a lot of communities in our society aren't talking enough about mental health. Keep your mental health and other aspects of your health first. People can't give it back to you if you sacrifice it. And I have to say, I've done some things that in my career. I've worked some long hours. There were times when I didn't pay enough attention to my health. I'm proud to say I'm a cancer survivor, and I work hard on my. As I do what I can to take care of myself. But do what you can. Your health is your wealth, and you can't. No one can give that back to you. And then be an ally for diversity and inclusion. Take responsibility for the equity and inclusion part. Even if you're in a place where that's not very diverse, you can still take responsibility for the equity and inclusion part. And you'll have opportunities in the hiring and promotion and outreach piece. Lastly, as I stop here, thank you for listening to me. I get a little worked up sometimes, so I'm about to end. And I also say I'm excited to say I'm hiring some new postdocs. I have some people coming on board and I have room for another. So if you know of a real promising PhD in environmental engineering that wants to do some cool work, have them get in contact with me and we can talk. So thank you for your time, and I guess I'll stop sharing.
Wow, thank you so much for that talk. I feel so inspired listening to you. That was really great. We're a little bit past the hour, so I want to share screen again. Just to let everybody know, we have our next event coming up on July 22nd at 5:30 p.m. and we're going to have Matt Armand. And if everybody, normally at the end of these, we do a little picture of everybody that attended. So if everybody who's still here could hang on for a few more minutes, Shannon was gonna grab the group picture. And yeah, turn on your cameras and Shannon, just let us know when you're ready. It's good to see everybody's faces. All right. I think we've got most people's cameras on.
Okay, are we ready?
think so.
Okay. All right. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, let's look. Oh, very nice.
Awesome. All right. So I totally understand if people have to go, but I did see at least one question in the chat. If you have time for that, Professor Harper.
Yeah. I talked a little long and got carried away, I'm sure. So I can sit for a while. Yeah.
All right. So it was about how colorism affected your professional journey. How it did, and if so, how did you overcome it? I know in the beginning you talked a bit about feeling like you were teased for being very dark skinned. And I guess you never followed up with like, how did you end up overcoming that?
Yeah, colorism did create some self-esteem issues for sure. It's interesting. There have been times in my career when people refer to how dark I am, but it's not usually colleagues, it's usually students. And sometimes it's students that are trying to be a kind of mischievous. So it's still in the background occasionally. I think with time, you learn how to carry your water, but I also think that as I continued, I started to see that I had my cross to bear, but other people had theirs too, and I think it helped that it wasn't personal. I also met a lot of other people that dealt with colorism. So that's another aspect of it that helped me put it into some perspective. And frankly, another element of this is that I think in the late 80s and early 90s, being dark, I don't know, almost became a good thing for social reasons. I mean, you started to see more dark people on TV. And let me say this, technology improved. So the darker people that showed up on TV looked better. They didn't look like black splotches, like black ink splotches that they used to look like in the 70s. So I think that helped. But in terms of my professional journey, there have been a few times when students have referred to my darkness in a way that I thought was disrespectful, but I've been able to put some context around it.
One of the other pre-submitted questions we had was, can you think of an example of a diversity and inclusion event that you attended which made an impact on you or others, and what made it a good event?
Well, the events that have made the most impact for me were not exciting events. It's the work that people have to do behind the scenes to challenge how we do things. I think it's committee work when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, not necessarily an event like this, but it's being in faculty hiring committees when we're talking about candidates. And I see some of that, some of the negative things creeping in that shouldn't be there. Those moments have a big impact on me because I can still see the evidence that we have work to do on those hiring committees, for example. Those moments have a big impact on me. But events like this, I think are great because I still want to meet people. But specifically with respect to DEI, it's the work that we're doing and that leaves an impression with me. I'm thinking now about a moment when in a hiring committee where colleagues I thought colleagues were in need of some training. Listen, people will tell you that this diversity training, it's a waste of time. Why, no, it's not. No, it's not. People are still asking questions of a women candidates that you shouldn't be asking. Well, is she married? Is she, what about, I wonder if she has kids. I wonder if she'll be able to do the work. What are you talking about? Why are we talking about whether or not she's married. That's not our business. You know, oh, I wonder how old he is. What difference does that make? How old he is? Is that a criterion? I've heard that in meetings. Yeah, so.
How do you deal with those situations when you're confronted with those kind of disrespectful comments from students, or those in those committee meetings where that sounds like it would be pretty challenging to address, or at least intimidating?
Yeah, I don't have a formula, but sometimes humor works when you can throw the negative thing back to people. Sometimes they can wake up a bit and realize, oh yeah, maybe that was a silly question. So humor certainly has its place when you can do it, but I've stepped on some trolls and said some things that maybe cause people to not like me. I've raised my voice. I've said, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't, what are you talking about? I mean, I've done that too. I don't know if that works, but so this is a good question, and I'm still figuring it out. But I also don't want to act like I'm the one that I want to remember that I'm still learning too, and that it could just as well be me if I'm not careful, asking some of the wrong questions and taking my focus off the things that we need to be focused on.
Are there any examples that jump to mind related to that, of like things that maybe you've learned in the past year or few years, of maybe some blind spots?
Well, I think I understand why some candidates, when they apply for faculty positions, will hide certain information in their package, and I think I think it can be a good thing. I think we, as when we're looking for faculty members, or really when we're trying to hire people, I think we need to not look so skeptically upon applicants that may, in their package, intentionally hide. For example, they may intentionally hide some personal information that they might think might bias them a bit. I can remember a package that I was looking at where a faculty member didn't share the information about citizenship status. And in the meeting I was in, there were people saying, hey, we need to know, is this a citizen or is this a foreigner? We need to know if this is a foreigner, and I thought, well, hold on. We'll get to that. we'll get to that. But right now, I mean, let's not let the foreigner idea just interfere with the. So what I'm saying is, there are times when committees need to stay disciplined. Here's what I'm really trying to say. There's a place for training faculty on issues related to hiring and promotion. Diversity related training is needed, and we act like it's not, but we do need that training. I see Tia saying something that's very relevant to what I'm saying. Hide or change their name so it doesn't reveal their race. I was actually thinking of that too. You can have people who apply with a name that they may think may connote something, not just racial, but socioeconomic, like, well, I don't want to be too stereotypical, but there are names out there that sometimes people hide. They may use a middle name or another name in place of the name they normally use because they don't want a negative connotation associated with who they are based on their name.
Yeah, definitely agree with everything you're saying. And it's really upsetting that people feel the need to change their names if they can't bring their full selves to an interview or to their job.
Yeah, that's an issue. But again, to answer your question, there's a place for diversity training. It's not like this waste of time that a lot of us, you see an email, diversity training meeting. Oh gosh, we got this again. It's not a waste of time.
Yeah, definitely. Does anybody else have any other questions? We're a relatively small group now, so if anybody just wants to turn on their mic. Well, I guess if there aren't any more questions, we can wrap up for tonight.
Julie, thank you. And thank you for everybody that came. I really enjoyed this. It's a good time to get away from the things that would normally be taking me away. And it's good to see some new faces and some old faces and some old friends. Well, I think my contact information is in the bio. At least people know I'm at AFIT. So I'm certainly would be happy to hear from any of you by email if you have any questions. And I didn't talk that much about my research. So if you're interested in that, we can talk about that too.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for agreeing to be part of this. We're really grateful that you took the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to everybody.